Hello everyone, I'm Benjamin Kier. Welcome back to the Benjamin Kier Show. I know we usually get together on Tuesdays for episodes, but with the unfortunate events that took place in New York yesterday, I couldn't bring myself to record the episode. I didn't feel right. I wanted some time to think and reflect, and I wanted to take this opportunity to publicly state my sadness for those involved in the subway attack in New York City. I'm praying for those injured, those affected, their families, and the rest of the country as we mourn this awful event. You know, it's a beautiful day in Miami. We had some great weather the past couple of days, and I discussed this with those close to me, especially my family. Days following tragedies are so tough to comprehend and deal with, especially when it's bright and sunny outside. I don't know if it's a Cuban thing, it's a Miami thing, or it's just me, but we say, ¿Cómo se puede ser tan hermoso el día cuando la situación es tan mala y fea? That's Spanish for, how can the day be so beautiful when the situation is so bad and ugly, you know? So this past couple of weeks, even before yesterday, I was fortunate enough to get outside and enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed the outdoors as well, whether it was rain or shine. But even as beautiful as the day was outside, it was tough here in Miami this week and in South Florida and the rest of the United States. The football landscape was shocked by the devastating news of Dwayne Haskins passing. It was so sad, it was so sudden, it was too soon. According to reports and law enforcement, Haskins was trying to cross Interstate 595's westbound lanes, which are near the Fort Lauderdale-Hollywood International Airport in Broward County, when a dump truck hit him. Haskins was training in South Florida in the offseason with his teammates. All of his teammates, coaches, and former associates had nothing but great things to say about him, his energy, and his work ethic, especially towards the end. In my time as a sports fan, although maybe shorter compared to some of you, I've heard too many stories of young athletes being taken before their time. I'll never forget hearing about him for the first time. A lot of fans came to know Haskins after his incredible senior season with the Buckeyes, but I was one of those fortunate to learn about Haskins' on-field ability even earlier than that. My freshman year, my mom and I made an appointment at a cell phone store. It's one of the major brands, you can guess. We had an appointment, but the line was eternal. I mean, we came in around 10 o'clock and we didn't leave until 4 in the afternoon. I'm not exaggerating. This store did have TVs, but all the channels were stuck. You couldn't change them because the remotes weren't just out for customers to play with. They were probably in the back. There was one TV that caught my attention around midway through. At around 12 noon, this channel started playing a game. I should mention that this trip to the cell phone store was September 1st, 2018. Some of you may have already recognized that date, but for those of you who haven't yet, that was the day that Ohio State opened their football season versus Oregon. It was Dwayne Haskins' college debut football game. The new Buckeye torched Oregon. That game was watching someone play Madden on rookie mode. It was so highlight worthy. Haskins had a great game. Amongst some of his highlight reel plays, he had a 75-yard touchdown to Terry McLaurin, who now is the number one wide receiver for the Washington Commanders. Back then, watching Haskins make those highlight plays made that drag of a day that much better. We all know the rest. His senior season was one for the books, the 50 touchdowns, the countless regional and conference awards that were given to him. He was talented. Everyone saw it. So to think that someone who is so strong, so tough, so elite, so unlike anything that I'd ever seen, especially at that age, could be taken so quickly, so soon, it's difficult to comprehend and accept. I wish his family and those closest to him peace and the ability to move forward. I hope that we remember Haskins for his incredible career, his genuine love for the game, but most importantly, for the person who he was. I hope we never lose sight of that. UFC 273 was one of the most balanced cards that we've seen this year. The people's main event came way before the actual show did, but it did not disappoint. Number 2, Gilbert Burns faced the rising star Khamzat Chimaev in what was probably the most anticipated non-title, non-Conor McGregor fight of the year. Each fighter traded blows that would have knocked out most of the other fighters in the welterweight division. Tensions were running high. There was some back talk between the fighters. That made for an even more interesting scrap, and even had fans that much more invested. Although really close, the fight did end in a decision win for Khamzat, which Burns did not seem to be okay with, and he does not seem to be okay with. He's been tweeting all week different stats, pictures, and moments from the fight where he believed he earned the win, and he's also hinted that he wants a rematch in a couple tweets. And who knows, if Khamzat does take the belt from Usman in the future, then I don't see why a rematch wouldn't be in the cards. Of course, Burns would have to stay on top, and Khamzat would probably have to face Colby Covington before he even considered taking the title from Usman. It may have been lopsided then, But the Sterling versus Jan 2 fight was definitely closer than the last one. This fight was the second main card battle that had people thinking that the fight could have swung either way in terms of decision. Both fighters showed up and showed out. But I personally agree with the outcome. Sterling by decision win. He was way more of a decisive showing this time around. He maintained ground control early in the fight, and that made it hard for Jan in those earlier fights to make a case that he won. He was all over him. It wasn't a Colby Covington type of maul, but it was definitely showing clear control of the octagon. Sterling was not worthy of that first title after that first fight, but he promised that he was committed to remaining champ after a rematch. He worked hard, and he did just that. If you're a real fight fan, you've got to love this storyline. Sterling took the belt on a technicality the first time around, but when he was given the chance to prove himself, the lights were not too bright, and the stage was not too big. All the credit in the world to Sterling. He deserves to be the UFC's bantamweight champ. Nothing's ever perfect. As good as the matchups were on this card, as fun as the build-up was to some of these bigger fights, there are bound to be mismatches, and even matchup failures. The main event, the actual main event, was featherweight champ Alexander Volkanovski defending his title against the Korean Zombie. To fight fans' credit, a lot of people said that this was not a worthy matchup for the title. Korean Zombie was not ready. He wasn't proven enough. Sometimes fight fans can be a bit harsh, and they can be a bit biased. So you have to take this kind of thing with a grain of salt, and you really have to filter through the noise of what people are saying. But this time, let's give them credit. They were right. To those who felt this was a mismatch, you were absolutely correct, and it was proven on Saturday night. ESPN has a feature on the fantasy football app called Streak, which is pretty much their version of pick'ems. There's no money or deposit involved, but it does give you a chance to compete and win some real cash if you're at the top of the leaderboard at the end of the night. There's always these tournament-style pick'ems for the UFC pay-per-view, and lately I've enjoyed participating in them. On my previous try, I got 11 out of 13 correct, which was my highest ever, and I enjoy the competitive nature of it. I also like testing my fight knowledge. I mean, considering that I think I'm a voice in sports, I always look for the opportunity to prove my sports knowledge, even to myself. In general in sports, in order to pick the winner, you're not always going to pick the favorite. It's just not logical. There will be an upset. The favorite doesn't always win. Because the best team or the best individual or the best fighter doesn't always show up and out. That's basic stuff. So I do tend to stray away from some of the norm picks on my picks. So when I reached the title fight main event on my list of pick'ems for UFC 273, some of you may be surprised to know that I went against 87% of ESPN voters, and I picked the Korean Zombie to take the title. Yes, as absurd as it may have seemed, especially in retrospect, I went with the minority 13%, and I'll tell you why. Speculation is never a good excuse when explaining why you got something wrong, or why you jumped to a conclusion. But a couple months ago, I was awake in bed after midnight watching ESPN, and they're done with SportsCenter, they're done with their normal casts, and a documentary started to play. It was a feature piece on the Korean Zombie, on his journey and his training. I highly suggest you go ahead and watch it. I'm sure you can find the name online and you can search it up. Maybe it's even on the ESPN Plus app. But to me, it made him think that he was unstoppable. He's a true warrior, and he displayed it. So I thought that after getting this insight into his training and his career and his journey, I thought, hey, I know his background. And I sensed a contender and a championship level push was in his future. That may still very well be the case and be possible. But it wasn't the case on Saturday night. I won't speak for you or for fight fans, but I do love to watch slugfest and exciting fights. But that was really tough to watch. Even in the Jacksonville arena, who tend to have fans who embrace the violence and the hits and a dominating performance that the UFC puts on, the crowd was absolutely silent at the end of that fight. It hurts me to say this, especially as someone who understands what the Korean Zombie's been through to get to this point, but he did not belong there. The Korean Zombie did not belong in the octagon with Alexander Volkanovski. Not for a pay-per-view, and certainly not with a title on the line. The Korean Zombie has faced formidable competition on his journey to the title, but not enough to comfortably say that he was prepared to take on Alexander Volkanovski. And not just Alexander Volkanovski, but featherweight champion Alexander the Great Volkanovski. He's the hottest he's ever been in his career right now. He's on a rampage. Volkanovski put on a masterclass. He made an example out of him. That fight gives Volkanovski the chance to say, I want to compete for gold in another weight class, and have those words actually receive consideration from the public and possibly the UFC. Now, the UFC part remains to be seen, but you understand what I'm saying. The fight made Volkanovski look like a god, like the world-class fighter that he is. A fight that dominating should not take place in a championship bout, because the opposition should be prepared for that situation. They should be prepared to take on a championship-level fighter that can dominate to that extent. But the Korean Zombie was not battle-tested like that. He wasn't. Fight fans have been critical of Herb Dean in the past. Even the UFC executives like Dana White himself have called out Herb Dean, and they've called out his decision-making process. He saved a couple years of the Korean Zombie's life by calling that fight when he did. You can say I'm being dramatic. You can say that's not true. That's how I see it, and that's how most other people saw it. The punishment he was taking was unprecedented. It should not have happened. It was unsafe at that point. We're talking about combat sports where they're taking and absorbing hits, but that was just too much. As a whole, UFC 273 provided us with some awesome matchups, memorable, potentially Hall of Fame moments, and some great potential future fights as well. But that last fight just wasn't it. The word retirement was appropriated from French in the 16th century. It was originally used in the vocabulary of those involved in the military and the army. It meant to withdraw to a place of safety or seclusion. The practice of retirement was invented in 1889. It was a concept that was established for the rest of us with the idea that those who are disabled from work by age or invalidity have a well-grounded claim to care from the state. Now, I'm not here to give you a history lesson or a vocab lesson. I'm not qualified enough to do that. But I bring up the history of retirement, the word and the practice itself, because it's been reinvented over time in the workplace. But that's a conversation that's way too long and too in-depth. I'm talking about the reinvention of retirement in sports. Floyd Mayweather forever changed what we believe retirement is. When you heard an athlete say he was retiring 15, 20 years ago, you immediately thought, oh, that's the end. There's no second thought. Maybe the person would go into broadcasting or sell t-shirts and merchandise, but it was over for the most part. But Floyd Mayweather retired and would go on to show the world, hey, I'm just getting started. The money in the name Floyd Money Mayweather? No, that money part came after his first retirement. Something that was seen as the end, he found a way to use it as leverage. After that retirement, boxers wanted to fight him. He was still elite. So when you offered Floyd Mayweather a contract to fight, you weren't just paying him for the fight. You were paying Floyd for his ceremonial value. The world was going to watch and say, wow, this is the opponent that brought Floyd Mayweather out of retirement. And that was the contract, and those were the zeros and the digits that convinced him to come back. People like to be involved and associated with valuable things. It's just human nature. They associate big money fights with great fights. Wow, they're spending that much money on putting this fight together? It must be important. It must be a must-watch. So they'll tune into the World Tour and the press conferences, and they'll buy the tickets, and they'll buy the pay-per-view. Promoters were forced to pay him more. Mayweather's brand grew even bigger, and as time went on, with the younger and younger audiences, which helped him out. Floyd always hit all the demographics. He was great at that. It's an incredible idea that he's put into action more times than one, this retirement-unretirement thing. And fight fans may not like it, but Floyd's made a recipe that can't be topped. Athletes follow suit to it till this day, even beyond boxing. I know Floyd has an upcoming exhibition fight, which has people pretty upset because they believe it hurts the integrity of the sport, especially as he gets older and does what they believe is a money grab. But that's not why I'm bringing any of this up. Floyd's retirement-unretirement game demonstrates to me one main thing. It's that he's ahead of the curve. People and enemies of his have been critical of his education, have even made fun of it. But he's pretty smart. He's very business savvy. He's reinventing the wheel before it breaks off the axle. He's revolutionizing the sport of boxing even as it's declining. So Floyd said something this week that people were quick to criticize. At a media event prior to his next exhibition fight, Floyd said, if you look nowadays in the top 10, everybody's got a belt now. There's too many belts in the sport of boxing. Everybody is champion. I don't think he's wrong. There's 17 different weight classes in boxing with at least 5 major recognized belts in each of them. I'm not even discussing those regional belts or the smaller tournament-style belts. There's too many promoters who have saturated the great sport of boxing. It's that simple. It's been that way before Floyd was in the game, before Mike Tyson, and maybe even before Ali or during that time. The UFC is not perfect, and they're not boxing, but they are in the combat sports family. They're coming off fiscally their most successful year, earning $5.1 billion in revenue in 2021. They have 9 weight classes with 1 champion in each. And they're not dragging out fights or the time in between big pay-per-views. The UFC has a fight event every week, and they have at least one huge pay-per-view at least once a month. They're doing it all on a regular basis, and they're not oversaturating the market. They're not struggling to garner attention even though they've got these fighting competitions often. This was boxing's biggest fear in the beginning. Oh, if we have too many events, we can't keep the fans wanting more. We can't keep them interested. So they would have 1, 2, 3-year gaps in between fighters and their next big matchup. That promoter's philosophy was clearly flawed. And it was downright selfish. Trap the boxers in these long-term deals. Trap them. Make them rely on you as a promoter to bring them back into notoriety. That was never the answer. Jake Paul, the internet star turned boxer that everyone loves to hate, he fought 3 times in 2021, and he made $40 million. He was ranked 20th in Forbes' list of highest paid athletes. The person that everybody loves to say is a non-athlete. So promoters saying, oh no, don't fight too often, you won't make any money, fans are not going to care. It's hard to believe that after seeing an example like that. Love him, hate him. Floyd Mayweather, love him, hate him. Floyd Mayweather's take is money. He's absolutely right. Boxing has too much going on, too many people sticking their hand in the cookie jar. It's got to be reduced. The market of promoters and of agents has to be reduced. And the championship belts can't be so readily available. I'm not saying it's easy to become a world boxing champion. It definitely takes talent and a lot of hard work. But come on. At least 5 different major championship belts for a single weight class? Floyd was ahead of the curve then. And he's right again. With that, we wrap up this episode of the Benjamin Kier Show. I super appreciate your continued support of the show. If you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Also turn on the notification bells so you never miss an episode. As always, I'm Benjamin Kier. You're watching The Benjamin Kier Show. I'll see all of you next week.